Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we'll have the latest from the live radar, run for the UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, as it is remaining dry but gloomy over the coming week, and we are likely to see a few bits of rain here or there as we do see a slight weakening of the higher pressure towards the latter part of the working week. But still, the headlines are dry and mild like it has been for the past few days. As we enter the longer range though, as we have alluded to in the past few videos, we are starting to see signs of a bit of a pattern change. High pressure still looks like it's going to be nearby, but doesn't look like it's going to be sat over the top of us anymore. Could be ridging northwards and could encourage changing air masses. Now, at the moment, there's still a lot to decide, but we are seeing quite a few runs starting to show some sort of northern blocking, and we can attempt at pushing in at least some cool air in from the north or the northeast. Now, of course, it is way too early in the season to see anything majorly cold. We're about 3, 4, 5 weeks away from that being a possibility, but nonetheless could still see some pretty chilly conditions into the middle of the month, maybe even some snow in the north, and more widespread frosts and just generally cold conditions if that did come off. There is growing support, but it's not overwhelming at this stage. It keeps slowly gaining some support over the past few days, but still up for debate, and we'll check that out in the second half of the video. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well. The link's in the description. Now, to start on the live radar, it looks like the live radar from yesterday and the day before, and probably even the day before that. Bone dry, very little precipitation around at all, a few patches of lighter rain and drizzle in the north and the west. Again, we could be plucking these images from the weekend and we'd be seeing no difference. And that is because it has stayed exactly the same. It is still very gloomy out there, unfortunately. There have been a few breaks in the cloud, especially to the north of hills, but generally still very cloudy and yet pretty miserable, albeit dry. Now, temperatures, as I'm recording this, around 9:15 in the evening, are fairly mild. A few blues appearing, and you can see across Europe it is colder, and you can see where the very cold air is going across much of Eastern Europe, and that's because we've got the high pressure sat over the top of us, and on the eastern edge we are seeing northerly winds, and that is encouraging very cold air to be plunging into Eastern and Southeastern Europe. But look down towards Turkey, down towards the Balkans, it is very cold. Just because of that northerly wind. So you can see for Western Europe, though, very mild as we're actually pumping up southerly winds, and it can actually turn even milder over the coming days. So you can see how this blocking area of high pressure, yes, is delivering very cold conditions for some, but we are on the mild side of the block at the moment, and that's what always happens, and that's why there is so much uncertainty over positioning of blocks, because it can develop very cold conditions and it can develop very mild conditions. And at the moment, with the block over northern and northwestern Europe, it means we are on the mild side. Eastern Europe is on the cold side. But as I said, this block could move northwards and westwards, and that could shift that colder air more towards our shores. As I said, that could happen around the middle of the month. But over the coming days, it is going to remain mild and dry. If we do look at the latest precipitation charts as we head into Tuesday, it's very similar to Monday. A few more showers around maybe in the far west for the Republic of Ireland, but still very similar, dry and mild. In towards Wednesday, again, there could be a few patchy showers around, a bit of drizzle, but again, dry and mild. As we slowly move into Thursday, again, a few bits and bobs in the west, and again to north of hills, maybe Wales and Scotland could see some drier, brighter conditions developing as a result of that elevation, allowing those clouds to break apart. And then as we head into Friday, maybe a little bit more in the way of some persistent rain in the far west. Again, this is the slight weakening in that higher pressure, allowing weather fronts to try and nudge in, but again, really confined to the far west, all that precipitation. And you can see as we head into Saturday, some of that precipitation moves in, but the high pressure is re-strengthening and rebuilding, and it means it kind of nudges it all away and turns it really back to nothing. So definitely does look like it's going to remain fairly dry, few bits and bobs more of rain around, but really the status quo does continue for the rest of this week and the first 10 days of November. Some areas probably not going to see any precipitation at all. Now, if you have a look at the max temperatures, you can see as we head into Tuesday, very similar again, high single digits and a few cooler spots further northwards, but most 10 to 14 degrees. As we head into Wednesday, could turn even milder in the west, especially 16, 17, but most low to mid-teens. And the same can be said into Thursday again, looking widely low to mid-teens. And again, Friday, fairly mild. Further northward, slightly chillier, maybe more towards the high single digits, but again, most are fairly mild for the time of year. And the same can be said for Saturday, maybe the far southwest getting up towards 15 or 16 there. So really no real change over the next 5 days. Again, pretty boring, pretty box standard and repetitive. But again, we always have to remember that we can be under massive deluges this time of year. And even though it's gloomy, it's a little bit depressing outside, it is a lot better than seeing massive deluges and flooding and all that horrible effects that we can see during these normally pretty wet and windy months. But as we enter the longer range, we'll see what is in store potentially as we head into the second half of the month. High pressure still in control, slight weakening perhaps later this week. And that could allow this low to just nudge in for a time, developing slightly more unsettled conditions. But really, we're just talking about a few odd showers. It does squeeze the isobars up from the south, so it does encourage a milder air to push in. And then as we head into next week, high pressure is still firmly in control. But as we head towards day 10, we start to see a shift in the northern hemisphere. We start to see that high pressure moving towards northeast Canada and Greenland, and low pressure exiting out of the Arctic, and the tropospheric polar vortex shifting towards Scandinavia and generally Russia. Again, not a humongous change, but just this shift of the polar vortex allows the higher pressure to move towards Greenland and more to our west, and that starts to encourage colder northerly winds, and in the end, low pressure sits right over the top of us with pretty chilly northerly flow coming in. Again, we probably wouldn't be looking at snow. Again, it's probably still a little bit too early in the season, and that air mass isn't that cold. It's around sort of the 4 to 6 degrees below average widely, maybe 8 degrees below average in a few spots. Chilly, but nothing amazingly cold. But it would be definitive change in towards the middle of the month. It does continue towards the end of the run, for eventually the polar vortex reorganises towards Greenland and kind of breaks that pressure build down into more of a westerly. Nonetheless, though, definitely interesting in showing a break in the pattern. What exactly that break will be, this is still up for debate, but definitely showing a break in that pattern around that day 10 period. So we should be seeing a lot more of these runs developing in the next couple of days. It does look like around that 13th to 15th of November, that's when we could see this high pressure finally moving somewhere else. And this run goes colder and more unsettled for a few days. Nothing remarkable, but definitely producing something a lot chillier. Now, to compare to the latest GM, very similar over the next 5 to 7 days. High pressure continuing to dominate, and then eventually out towards day 10, very similar to the GFS, and it starts to migrate its high pressure towards Greenland and Iceland. Now, we are still under the centre of that high, so it does mean that we don't see all this cold air that goes into Scandinavia and out towards Eastern Europe. It still remains to our east, but the potential for that to nudge in if that high pressure did really get going. So not quite as direct with any colder, more uncertain conditions like the GFS, but it shows a very similar setup starting to build. You see this with all this blocking to our north and our west. And if we do look at the northern hemisphere view, look at northern Canada and Greenland, very little in terms of the darker blues, which is the lower height. The tropospheric polar vortex very much displaced towards the eastern side as we are looking at it. So yeah, very interesting. Could develop something a bit colder in the subsequent days, but nonetheless, it's the pattern we're watching for and a pretty definitive change appearing here at day 10 compared to what we've got at the moment, where, yeah, the polar vortex is kind of spread out a little bit, but it's kind of evenly distributed, not really pushed to one side of the pole. It really is only split apart by the high pressure trying to extend northwards, but not getting any real advantage. So you can see here that shift in the tropospheric polar vortex, all shifting towards Russia and Scandinavia, could allow colder north or northeasterly flows to develop if the highs got going towards Greenland. Interesting though, as we head towards the middle of the month. Now, if you finally compare to the ECMWF, again, high pressure is in control over the coming days. Again, as we head towards day 10, it attempts to move northwards, and it is having some success, and does, at day 10, start to push in a fresh easterly wind. You can see cold air, it's nudging in from the southeast, and you can see by day, much, much cooler, and by night colder as well. We wouldn't be expecting anything amazingly cold, as it's not that strong of an easterly flow, but it is an easterly flow nonetheless, and it is developing. The interesting sign, though, is the rising heights over Greenland. Now, it doesn't mean that a big high pressure is going to develop. I'm just noting that in the past few frames here, pressure is rising towards Greenland, and it looks like this high is extending that way. There still is low pressure towards northern Canada, so that could break it down with a jet stream. But, again, very similar to the GM and the GFS, trying to build that high further northwards and westwards. Again, we'll have to wait and see with how much success it has. But the big takeaway from these three runs isn't the sort of nitty-gritty details. It's not the exact wind direction or the exact positioning of high pressure, low pressure. The big thing is the fact that it is showing that high pressure moving away. It is showing a breakdown in this stubborn high. And even if the high pressure doesn't go that far, just a change in air mass will allow fresh conditions to move in, bit of precipitation, and potentially some clearer skies. So, at worst, that's what we're looking at. Potentially, though, a big change could occur if we saw something like the GFS develop, which is the high pressure probably going to our north and our west, and allowing low pressure from the north to replace it. Now, finally, if we compare to the ensembles, if we look at the latest GFS, which have shifted quite substantially today, not necessarily definitively showing a colder pattern, but you could see in around that 7-8 day time frame, a lot more runs now back towards average or below average. The last few days, it's really only been the last day or two of the runs where it's back towards average. So it has trended that way. But you can see today, really the last third to a half of the run is now average or below average, and quite a few runs going chilly. Nothing amazingly cold, nothing majorly down to -5 to -10, which would be sort of snow territory. But some runs just about touching that, and quite a few runs average to below average. Precipitation still not very high, so it does mean that I don't think any of these runs are showing complete westerly breakouts. That doesn't look like a possibility. It does look like even if that high pressure moves, we are still going to remain fairly immobile and fairly blocked. Because if we did see an Atlantic onslaught from some of these runs, which we would kind of expect during November, we would expect to see lots of precipitation, but we're not really seeing much at all. So yeah, definitely looks like a change will be occurring, but it still looks like it'll be a blocked pattern, that block just moving somewhere else. And if you're looking for colder weather, that is an encouraging sign, because if this block is going to get stuck for the next few weeks, maybe the next 4 or 5 weeks, kind of on and off, then as we head into late November, early December, and towards potentially even Christmas, there is a higher risk of something colder. A higher risk of that block being in a position that could develop something a bit snowy, could develop something a bit wintry and properly cold. Now, it's not a guarantee, of course, but it's just a higher chance. If we were seeing a flat westerly at the moment, then we'd equally say there's probably a lower chance of a more blocked, colder December, just because of the current trends. It would take quite a big shift to see something very blocked from when it is very, very unsettled flat westerly. We'd have to be a big sort of hemispheric pattern change. Whereas if it's already very blocked, all we kind of need is for that pattern to sustain itself. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it just means that there's a slightly statistically higher chance. We'll have to wait and see. But again, encouraging signs if you're looking forward to something properly cold. Not going to happen in the next few weeks, probably not going to happen in the next 2 or 3 weeks at least. But the signs are there for the longer term. And finally, if we compare to the ECMWF ensembles, midday run has just come out, and you can see once again quite a big shift towards colder conditions, back towards average. Not too many more going below average, but definitely back towards average, and more spread definitely occurring in the longer term. So still quite a lot of interest in what the exact pattern will be, but a lot more uncertainty has appeared in the past 24 hours or so, meaning that we are probably now pretty much picking up on that sort of 13th, maybe 12th to the 15th of November for that pattern change. So perhaps only a week longer until this high pressure, this dirty, miserable high finally gets going. Again, I don't want to complain too much because it is dry, but getting a bit sick of all the gloom, hoping for a bit of sunshine and vitamin D as we head into perhaps next week. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. I'll see you again for another video soon.